Chapter 1. It happened while he was getting a coffee. Sebastian had been standing in the line of a multinational coffee shop for about 2 minutes, staring at his phone, just like the other zombies had been doing. It was while he'd been texting his friend that a tall man had walked straight past him, cutting into the line. Excuse me, Sebastian began, moving to tap the guy on the shoulder, before quickly retracting his hand as he saw the pistol in the man's waistband. Backing away slowly, bumping into the lady behind him, who then stumbled into the guy behind her, Sebastian felt his voice catch in his throat. What was the best course of action? Ignore him? Run out of the shop? Before he could make his mind up, the man stepped towards the barista. I'll take a coffee, and the intel you stole, he stated coolly. With that, he pulled the pistol from his waistband and shot the barista in the shoulder. The woman fell backwards, slamming into the coffee machine, though she wasn't down and out. She hastily yanked a pistol of her own from beneath the counter, firing blindly. Every customer in the shop sprinted quicker than any of them had moved in their lives, all heading for the only door available, shoving each other out of the way, clawing for the exit. Sebastian, having been so close to the front of the queue, was left at the very back of the crowd. Gunshot after gunshot rang out, tables splintered, painted plaster turned to dust as it fell from the walls. Sebastian tripped. He didn't know what on, but before he knew it, he was sprawled on the floor, his phone flying from his right hand, sliding on the tiled ground. For a second, he thought that he'd been shot. He twisted around to see what was happening. The double doors to the right of the counter had been propped open, Sebastian seeing for the first time ever what was on the other side. What looked like a server room. On top of that, there were at least 3 people taking cover to either side of the doors, each of them wielding semi-automatic guns. How many of you are there? The man cried out, ducking behind the counter. He dealt with the barista, the woman now draped backwards over the coffee machines, her blood oozing onto the counter. Sebastian glanced back to the exit. Most of the crowd had gotten out, only a few stragglers left who'd been tripped up like Sebastian. Someone from the server room rushed out, swiveled around, and took aim at the man, that was promptly shot on the head, dropping only meters from Sebastian, their semi-automatic gun clattering to the floor. The muffled, well-pronounced voice of a woman came from the man's general direction. How's it looking? I'm in a gunfight with a fuck-ton of goons, the man replied, exasperated, pressing the fingers of his pistolless hand to his ear. It's definitely here, it's just getting to it. Be careful, the woman urged. If that intel gets out, every agent is at risk. The man peeked out from cover, fired twice, catching one of the goons as he'd called them in the shoulder, then ducked down again, his hand shooting back to his ear. I'm pinned down here. The police are on their way as backup. How long? 5 minutes. I'll be dead by then. Again, he rose, fired once, then ducked back to cover to reload. Sebastian didn't know what urged him to do it. Maybe it was the thought of people's lives being in jeopardy. Maybe it was his years of airsoft experience which made this feel less scary. Maybe it was his childlike desire to be a hero. Whatever it was, it made him grab the gun from the floor beside him, quickly taking aim and shooting 2 of the goons as they tried to rush the man. The man's head shot around, making eye contact with Sebastian, before giving a short, thankful nod. Before Sebastian could say anything, more goons appeared in the doorway, immediately taking aim at him at the sight of the gun in his hands. Sebastian threw himself forwards, taking cover behind the counter, right next to the man. We rushed them on 3, Sebastian panted, to which the man grinned. 1, Sebastian began. 2, the man continued. 3, they finished together. They jumped to their feet, firing immediately. Sebastian's semi-automatic instantly outshined the man's pistol, tearing into one of the goon's shoulders, making the woman tumble backwards, knocking her friend with her. The man moved around the counter, shot one guy in the head, then ended the 2 who were now sprawled on the floor. Before Sebastian could say anything to him, ask any questions, the man's free hand was at his ear again. I've got to help her. You what? The man shrugged as if the woman could see, turning his head nonchalantly to look at Sebastian. Some guy's just helping me. He's a natural, Roxy, he chuckled. That doesn't matter. You can't let a stranger in on the mission. Again, the man shrugged. He lowered his hand from his ear, stretching it towards Sebastian. What's your name, bud? Sebastian replied, staring at the man's hand, unable to take it thanks to the semi-automatic which he was still clutching. The man's hand hovered there for a moment before he realised that it wasn't going to be taken, sheepishly lowering it. Jake, he stated. I do hope that silence doesn't mean that you're briefing them. Jake returned his fingers to his ear, rolling his eyes as he did so. Just being polite, Roxy. Roxy sighed. Please, Jake, get a move on. It looks like you're close to the computer I'm tracking. If you can get into it, you may be able to access the server that the files are on. Jake nodded, then glanced at Sebastian. Mind covering me? For some reason unknown to him, Sebastian nodded. The two of them pushed through the doors, Jake rushing over to a terminal, pulling a tiny device from his pocket before he connected it to a USB port. He then tapped a rhythm on the device in his ear, letting him talk to Roxy without having to touch it. Okay, Roxy, I'm on the terminal. Looks like there's a firewall. On it, Roxy replied, Sebastian barely able to hear her from where he was standing. Those guys that came from here, Sebastian began, staring at the wreck of the coffee shop which he'd gotten so used to visiting. What were they doing? Dunno, Jake replied. Roxy tracked the threat we were sent to here, so it was probably just an ambush. Are you still with it? Yes, he's covering me, Roxy. It's fine, Jake assured, but Roxy wasn't convinced. What if he's undercover? If he was, I'd be dead by now. Roxy's tone made it sound as if she was ready to clap back with another argument, though she restrained herself. I'm through the firewall. Shit, Jake breathed, staring at the terminal in disbelief. What? Roxy pushed. Sebastian glanced at Jake over his shoulder, curious. It's more than just agent files, Jake began to explain, frantic. They know where the base is, they know it's me out here, they... Fuck. There's a live transcription of what I'm saying right now. Jake, get out of there, now, Roxy demanded. I gotta hack the server, Jake countered, his fingers moving frantically over the keyboard. This isn't the root directory, just a connection. We need to get this stuff off here. The building's rigged to explode. Sebastian felt his breath catch in his throat. He stared at Jake, who quickly glanced at him. Go, Jake demanded. Sebastian didn't waste a second. He darted through the open doors, dropping the gun as he did so, vaulted an overturned table, and crashed through the glass doors to the shop, shards of glass cascading behind him as he stumbled onto the pavement. The street was vacant already, the terror from the gunfight likely having scared everyone away, even the traffic. He fell onto the pavement on the other side of the road. Then came an ear-rupturing explosion. Instinctively, Sebastian curled up on the concrete, covering his head with his arms. He felt the rush of air from the debris zooming over his head, felt the heat of the flames, the vibrations of the shockwave. Apprehensively, Sebastian lifted his head once the noise had stopped. Jake was nowhere to be seen. Roxy sat across the table from Sebastian, her head in her hands. Sebastian didn't know what to say. Everything since the explosion had been a blur. Before he'd known what was happening, a helicopter had landed in the park behind him, Roxy had grabbed his arm, and he'd been dragged on board. He hadn't even processed her appearance for the first 30 minutes of being in her presence. After the helicopter had landed on top of a normal-looking building, he'd been ushered inside, given new clothes to wear, a black t-shirt and a pair of blue jeans, to replace his own damaged clothes, had been strode through the building, and had finally been sat down in what looked like a meeting room to record the events of the previous hour. That's how it happened, Roxy asked after a moment, raising her head as she did so from across the table. Her vibrant blue eyes met Sebastian's brown gaze, drilling into his mind. Sebastian nodded weakly. Roxy sighed deeply, tears stinging her eyes. If you don't mind me asking, Sebastian began, though his voice trailed off as he examined Roxy's face, trying to judge if she needed a moment. You were so adamant that I shouldn't be involved, so why am I here? Because you'd be killed out there if we left you, Roxy replied simply. She took a quick breath, squeezing her eyes closed as she did so before she met his gaze again. Jake was trying to recover confidential information which has somehow been leaked. As you heard, whoever's done this had access to our line of communication too, as they were transcribing our conversation, so they definitely knew about you. Sebastian gave a weak nod. I also ran a quick background check and determined that you are a regular person who's been caught in this web. Roxy hesitated for a second, trying to decide how to continue. So, I'm sorry to say, she said softly, but your life can't return to normal for a while. Not until this entity or group has been dealt with, she elaborated. If you continue as you were, well, let's just say that it won't end well. Again, Sebastian nodded. Why did he feel okay about that? What now? He posed. Roxy shrugged. As much as I hate to say it, I really don't know, she admitted. I suppose I can show you to your room. My room? I thought it was implied that you're staying here. Well, yeah. But... A question nagged at Sebastian. Where is here? Roxy smiled lightly, pushing herself to her feet, almost using the table as a crutch. This is the headquarters of Apocalypse Control. Chapter 2. Sebastian sat on the edge of the bed in the cosy room which had been designated. It was only a few meters in width and length, containing only a bed, desk, wardrobe, TV, and a door which led to an ensuite bathroom. Roxy stood in the doorway, watching him as he took in his surroundings. It isn't much, I know, but it'll let you get by for a while as we deal with this situation. She smiled at him, for the first time, Sebastian noted, her face softening substantially. I suppose that you could think of this as a holiday. Sebastian almost snorted. Not likely, he retorted. I hate being confined. Roxy fidgeted with the collar of her white business shirt, then brushed some loose hair from her black tie. I'm sure that you'll get used to it. She stepped further into the room, taking a moment to gaze at herself in the mirror on the wardrobe's door as she pulled the clip from her hair which had been keeping it in a tight bun at the back of her head, letting her elbow-length auburn hair fall messily. I want to help, Sebastian stated, before he could have a chance to stop himself. Roxy looked at him quizzically through the mirror's reflection. Why on earth would you want to help? You were just on the field with an agent and you saw that hardly ended well. Her voice grew weaker as she spoke, and her eyes seemed to darken before she gave a small, sporadic shake of her head and forced another smile. Anyway, you have helped. You gave additional context about the situation. But Roxy's forced smile grew genuine, yet sad. Stand up, she ordered, holding a hand towards Sebastian, to which he took it, letting her pull him towards her. For a moment, the two of them were stood inches apart, and something about the messiness of Roxy's hair and the smile on her face almost made Sebastian blush. Roxy stepped back, letting go of Sebastian's hand and motioning towards the mirror. What do you see? Sebastian stared at himself. His short, dark hair was matted with sweat, no longer standing in a quiff as it had been that morning, instead almost plastered to his forehead. His brown eyes seemed darker than usual, and he looked surprisingly pale. Despite being average height, he suddenly looked much shorter, matching Roxy's height, who, while not short necessarily, also couldn't be considered as being tall. Do you look like someone who should be going into training? Or back onto the field? Roxy questioned. Sebastian continued to stare at his reflection, reluctant to answer. He played the events from no more than an hour before in his head, everything an oddly comprehensible blur of gunfire and flames. Did he want to return to something like that? After a moment, Sebastian realised that he'd been silent, and that Roxy was clearly waiting for him to say something, watching his face through the mirror. His stomach growled, answering for him. I haven't had breakfast yet, he realised, embarrassed. Roxy chuckled. Well, that won't do, will it? Come on, let's get you something to eat. She turned, leaving the room, Sebastian following her, quickly catching up to walk beside her as he brushed his hair with his hands, trying to make it at least somewhat better. Don't you have somewhere to be? Sebastian asked, curious, cringing as he realised how rude he sounded, though Roxy didn't seem to notice or care. There are multiple people who do my job, Roxy stated. And I haven't had breakfast yet either. Sebastian's eyes narrowed slightly. Wait, aren't you the boss? Roxy raised her eyebrows, glancing at him. She almost seemed flattered. No, of course not. I'm simply the head of communications. I guide and aid only our most valuable agents while they're on missions. I have subordinates who are responsible for filing events and who are on call for everybody else. Sebastian blinked, having not expected so much information at once. Sure, he replied. So, who is the boss? You'll meet her soon enough, I'm sure, Roxy assured, leaving it at that. They walked in silence, though it wasn't nearly as awkward as Sebastian would have expected, but that might have just been because he spent the entire time examining his surroundings. There was a strange feeling of openness to the base, like he could tell that it stretched for miles and miles underground just from this hallway. How big is this place? Sebastian asked after a moment of trying to figure it out without any basis for an estimation. Oh, gosh. Probably about 100 square meters in diameter, Roxy guessed. There are 2 floors. The cafeteria is downstairs. They emerged into a large atrium, its main feature being the grand bifurcated staircase which led to the hallway which they were emerging from, and to another at the other side of the room. If you picture the building while facing this staircase, the right wing of the second floor of the building is reserved for the sleeping quarters and for our hospital, Roxy began to explain as they crossed the internal balcony and took the first steps down the staircase. The left is for the main offices behind each department, the boss's office, meeting rooms, places like that. That's where I work, for instance. They turned left, onto the main set of stairs. Then the left wing of the bottom floor is where everything regarding the agents and missions happens, essentially. Training, research, development, things like that. Finally, the right side of the bottom floor is for leisure. I mean, all agents, managers, department heads, and of course the lady in charge all live here, so we need somewhere to relax. That's where the cafeteria is, so I can show you the fun things too if you'd like, she concluded as they reached the bottom of the stairs and turned left again, heading towards the cafeteria. Sebastian nodded slowly, a little overwhelmed. It was too early for exposition, especially considering that he'd never even gotten a coffee from the shop before it had been blown to bits. Roxy noticed his dazed expression, a small smile forming. I know that it's a lot to take in, but as I said, you'll get used to it. Sebastian forced a small, weak smile. How about a game of ping-pong after breakfast? Is that appropriate? Roxy chuckled. Perhaps not, no, but it might help you to focus. Her smile faltered, and she stopped walking as soon as they'd entered the hallway leading from the atrium. She placed a tentative hand on Sebastian's right forearm, squeezing it lightly. This is all a shock, I'm sure. I know that I'd be shaken after seeing... well, you know. She forced another smile. Take your time to adjust. I'll be here to help you. Sebastian couldn't prevent himself from blushing this time. Why? He asked. I mean, surely you've got better things to do. Roxy shook her head slightly as she started walking again. Not at the moment. Nearly all of my agents are out on missions, yet they haven't seemed to need much of my input recently. As for our situation, I recorded our earlier meetings, so the boss is likely listening to that, and is likely reading my own debriefing of the situation from our end. We're just waiting for her to make a call on what to do next. And what do you think that'll be? Sebastian pushed. I'm not sure, to be honest, Roxy admitted. But I would like to think that Jake succeeded in doing something on that terminal. I didn't get an IP address for another server to trace, but he could obviously see something on there. He may have bought us some time, or managed to delete the most crucial data. I'm not sure, but... Roxy stopped in her tracks, her left hand shooting to her face to wipe at a tear which had escaped her professionalism. Excuse me, she mumbled, her voice suddenly unstable, as she rushed towards a nearby door which was marked as a female bathroom. Sebastian didn't know what to do. They were about halfway down the hallway, so at least he wasn't standing in the open, gawking at his surroundings like an idiot, but he didn't exactly feel comfortable suddenly being alone. After a few moments, he resigned to leaning against a wall. Eventually, he heard a hand dryer whirring, and after a dozen seconds, Roxy emerged, her cheeks red but no tears in sight. Sorry about that, she apologized quickly, forcing yet another smile. Shall we continue? Sebastian scratched his nose, avoiding eye contact, feeling as if it was his fault that Roxy started to cry. As much as he wanted answers, he didn't want to push the topic if it was going to upset her. They walked in silence, awkward silence this time. Roxy only broke it once they reached the cafeteria. So, she began, her voice much more stable. Her previous emotions weren't traceable in the slightest. We have quite a diverse workforce here, all with different food etiquettes, intolerances, and allergies, so there are plenty of options at any time, Roxy explained enthusiastically, much lighter than before. She almost gained a springier step as she strode towards the counter to grab a tray and a plate, Sebastian having to rush to keep up. While Sebastian took a tray of his own, Roxy bounced towards the bakery section, quickly grabbed a pair of tongs, and began to pile croissants onto a plate. I highly recommend the baked goods, she beamed as she worked, then glanced at Sebastian, looked slightly embarrassed, and slowly returned one of the croissants to the serving tray. A few minutes of indecisiveness later, Roxy and Sebastian were sat across from each other at a bench which reminded Sebastian too much of school lunch tables. Roxy took a slow sip of her black coffee, sighing into the mug. I apologize if my demeanour is slightly odd, she said after a moment, placing her mug back onto a tray. I wasn't close with Jake by any means, but it always stings when we lose an agent. Sebastian raised his eyebrows. You've dealt with this before? He asked gently, sipping his own coffee, a small amount of relief immediately flowing over him as he did so. Roxy nodded, buttering one of her many croissants. Yes, I'm afraid that it happens at least once per year. It isn't as common with the agents under my watch, as, like I said, it's a set list, much smaller and composed of the very best. But it does happen. She sighed as if she was only talking about being late on a rent payment. I'm worried that I may be getting slightly too used to death, though I only like this when I'm grieving, so I suppose it still affects me in some ways. Sebastian nodded lightly, almost absent-mindedly. Sorry, he said. Roxy turned her full attention to the croissant, taking a slow, dramatic bite before groaning slightly. Can you blame me? She then asked around her chewing, accidentally spitting small flakes of the pastry onto the table in front of her, to which she blushed, quickly brushing them onto the floor. I still want to help, Sebastian stated after a moment, as if unable to help himself, to which Roxy nearly choked on a crumb. There's nothing more that you can do, she spluttered, covering her mouth with the left hand. You said you ran a background check on me, Sebastian retorted. I don't know if it was included, but I've won a few local airsoft tournaments. It might not be army experience, but I can carry myself. Roxy looked uncertain. You can do some body tests on me too if you want, Sebastian continued. I'm fit, I'm healthy. You said there's a training area in this building, so why not put me through it? Roxy shook her head adamantly. It's dangerous. My agents are handpicked by the boss. She goes on expeditions to gather the best of the best from around the world, she explained. Jake was an exceptional soldier who exceeded anything that was asked of him. Tara, another agent, is an Olympic weightlifter, built like she's made of cement. No offense, Sebastian, but you're just a normal man. Sebastian stared at Roxy blankly. Roxy sighed. I'm sorry. I know that you don't want to be confined here, but it's safe. If I let you onto the field as you are now, you will die. Even if we give you basic training, you won't be fit for this sort of work, and we can't exactly wait around for a month for you to complete your full training. Not knowing what else to do, Sebastian, dejected, regretting having said anything, started eating. Roxy, however, wasn't done. If you'd like, she continued softly after a moment of hesitation, watching him. I can put your request forward. I can't guarantee that anything will come from it, but it's your choice if you'd like to take your chances. Thanks, Sebastian mumbled. Was this what he wanted? Chapter 3. It felt strange to be alone. A little device which Roxy was carrying had buzzed to say that she was needed by an agent, and so she'd rushed off, though had taken a moment to tell him quickly before leaving that she'd get his request to the boss as soon as possible, but that it would likely take a while, so he'd have to kill some time. There's plenty of things for you to do, she'd told him before stuffing the last of a croissant into her mouth. She'd stumbled to her feet, nearly tripping over the bench as she swung her legs over it, giving him a bashful smile. Maybe you can meet some of my agents. I know that Tara's here somewhere, probably at the gym knowing her, she suggested. Sebastian had nodded awkwardly, not wanting to admit that he'd already forgotten where the gym was likely to be. Was it the left wing of the first floor, or was it the second? I'll try to track you down to check on you once I'm done with my work, okay? With that, Roxy had rushed off, adjusting a tie while speed walking. Now, placing his tray on a collection shelf, Sebastian had no idea what to do. He could try to meet some of Roxy's agents, or at least the few who weren't on missions. He'd probably be working with them if his request was accepted, so it would be a good idea to meet them beforehand. He wandered towards the atrium, gazing through the doors which led from the hallway as he moved. Would the gym class as leisure or training? Wasn't it technically both? Eventually, he reached the atrium, deciding to just continue into the left wing, assuming that it was somewhere down there. Two people passed him, both in long white coats. One gave him a strange look, and the other whispered something into their ear. Did anyone aside from Roxy know about him being here? Surely, right? Unless the odd glance had been because he'd been with Jake when he died. You look lost. The American-accented voice made Sebastian jump, spinning on the spot to look at the woman who was speaking to him. She was taller than he was by a few inches, had thick, poofy black hair and a wolf cut, and a surprisingly pretty, timid-looking face considering that her muscles were probably twice the size of his, if not bigger, her ripped shoulders and thighs outlined perfectly by a black t-shirt and black shorts. Yeah, I'm new here, Sebastian stammered, shaken from being startled and trying his best not to stare at her biceps, instead trying to focus on her vibrant green eyes. The woman smirked. I know. She stuck her right hand towards him, which Sebastian hesitantly took, shaking it. Came back instead of Jake. Sebastian felt her squeeze his hand tighter, making him wince slightly. Yeah, I'm really sorry. She let go of his hand, subtly bit her bottom lip, and sighed. Not your fault. Sorry. She shook her head lightly and smiled. I'm Tara. Sebastian. You look scared of me. I am a bit. Tara grinned. Good, she almost growled, then laughed. Sebastian couldn't tell if she was trying to be friendly or not. You all alone? She questioned. Well, Roxy went to work, Sebastian replied. Tara motioned through the door behind her. Come with me. Sebastian didn't know if he wanted to or not, but he had been planning on meeting Tara, so it would be counterproductive to refuse. Walking in, Sebastian realized that they were in the gym, surprise, surprise. I'm about to work out. Want to spot me? Tara asked, to which Sebastian gazed at her blankly. Would I even be able to hold the weights you lift? He asked slowly, to which Tara grinned again, wider this time, revealing a perfect set of teeth. I like your humour, she complimented, patting him on the arm. That was more a genuine question than my humour. She rolled her eyes. Let's just see. With that, she led him to a bench press where she'd already set up her weights. Tara laid on the black leather padding, stretched her shoulder muscles, and gripped the barbell tightly. Try lifting it without me, she instructed, nodding backwards to motion for Sebastian to stand behind her. I'll support it so you don't kill me. Sebastian stared at the weights for a second, trying to calculate how much was on each end. 150 pounds. Stop scratching your balls and try lifting it, Tara mocked. Sebastian grabbed the barbell, holding it right next to Tara's hands, and tried to lift it. Surprisingly, it came up, though not by much and certainly not easily. Looking up at him, Tara laughed lightly. That's it. Go on. Lift, lift. Sebastian tried, but he couldn't raise his arms any higher. It was only about 2 inches above the rack. Tara pushed slightly, taking some of the weight, though certainly not enough to make it light enough for Sebastian to lift it without any issue. 5 inches, 6 inches. Once it had reached 8, Sebastian's face was red, veins were fiercely sticking out of his hands, arms and forehead, and he could feel himself getting more and more faint. Tara recognized this, taking almost all of the weight, resting it back on the rack. You actually did it, she exclaimed, quickly sliding out from under the barbell as if afraid that it wasn't supported correctly. She jumped to her feet, placing a stabilizing hand on Sebastian's shoulder. Shit, dude. Well done. Sebastian nodded lightly, breathing heavily. How had lifting a single weight for no more than 15 seconds taken such a toll on him? Yeah, it was an incredibly heavy barbell for him, but still. Maybe Roxy was right about him not being fit for the field. Shit, you okay? Tara questioned, quickly holding onto his other shoulder too, gripping him tightly. She bent over slightly, leaning close, gazing up at his face. You gonna faint? Nah, I'm just dandy, Sebastian quipped, chuckling slightly, though his knees proceeded to buckle. Tara supported him, guided him around the barbell, and sat him on the bench press. I wouldn't blame you for fainting. That's not an easy load to take. She grinned. You did well. Look like shit, though. Thanks, Sebastian panted. Tara patted him on the back quite hard. Give it a few, then I'll start my sesh. After 30 minutes of an intense workout, Tara was drenched in sweat, her pale skin almost glowing. She flashed a toothy grin, gazing at Sebastian, who wasn't in a much better shape than she was. He hadn't had to do anything while spotting her, and as soon as she turned her attention to a treadmill, he'd become completely unneeded. Thus, he decided to work out himself, running beside her, and lifting much, much lighter weights. Sebastian sat on the bench press, panting. Good workout, he breathed. Tara nodded, her hair, which she'd neglected to tie up, flicking sweat at Sebastian. Not bad, she agreed. You could do with heavier weights, though. Sebastian rolled his eyes mentally. Come on, she continued. Let's go shower. Come again? Tara gave an almost disappointed look. Yeah, right, like I'd fuck you, she almost spat, though proceeded to smirk. I meant I'll show you the showers. She started heading towards a large opening in the back of the room, sidestepping around the various machines and weight rack stationed throughout it, Sebastian following unstably, his legs exhausted. They walked around a dividing wall into a small locker room. Tara dropped onto a bench station between the two rows of lockers, immediately pulling her shoes off. Sebastian gawked. So, you're just... Well, don't look, Tara growled, throwing a horribly damp sock at him. Just turn around and undress. Sebastian obliged, very uncomfortable, though he trusted that Tara wasn't looking at him either. Nice back, Tara quipped after a moment. Sebastian glanced over her shoulder reactively, ready to give her a death glare, only to see that Tara had donned a massive dressing gown and that she wasn't even facing him. Stick your clothes in a locker and grab a robe, Tara instructed. Again, Sebastian complied. As he pulled the robe on, he thought that he saw Tara touch her ear, though it was only for a second. Come on, she told him, glancing over her shoulder. Just in here. She stepped around a corner. Sebastian hesitated for a second, nervous as to what was about to happen. Something didn't sit right, but he chalked that up to Tara sending him weird signals. He followed. Then, before he had a chance to process what had happened, he was unconscious. Chapter 4. The pain was the first thing which Sebastian felt, followed immediately by breeziness. He stirred, sitting up slowly, wincing from the deep aching in the left side of his head. His vision was blurry, so he squeezed his eyes closed, hoping that they would adjust. Once they had, the aching in his head easing substantially, he processed the room. It looked like a mixture between an indoor climbing centre, a gymnasium, and an organised parkour course. Padded blocks of various sizes and colours sat everywhere, some waist-high barriers, others wide platforms. There were multiple levels to the room too, stretching up at least 3 floors, the higher areas composed of a large collection of platforms, each at different heights, all of them supported by tight cables which connected them to the outer walls. As he clambered to his feet, taking in the strange sight, a male Spanish voice echoed throughout the room. Hola, Agent, he greeted smoothly, his voice like butter. Welcome to your combat test. What? Sebastian called out, hoping that he misheard, that the blow to his head was making him hallucinate or something. You're confused, I know, but don't worry. It's quite simple. In front of you there is a rifle, he explained. Take it. As the man spoke, a slot in one of the platforms directly in front of Sebastian opened, and attached to a hydraulic extending stand, a semi-automatic assault rifle rose to his eye level. Sebastian gawked. Take it, the man repeated, patient. It won't hurt you. Well, unless you want it to. After a few seconds of hesitation, Sebastian approached the rifle. He ran a finger along the forend, the metal shockingly cold to the touch. He held the grip with his right hand, took the barrel with his left, and pulled the stock to his shoulder, looking down the sights. The instant chilliness on his shoulder made Sebastian realise with a jolt that he was wearing a thin shirt. Glancing down, he saw that he'd been put in a comfortable, albeit slightly tight, airy black outfit, a matching black utility belt housing replacement magazines around his waist. "Good," the man continued. "Now, if you would be so kind to turn your attention to the robot behind you." Sebastian twisted around quicker than he could have imagined at the mention of a robot. The machine stood about 10 meters from him, made entirely of twisting wires, hydraulics, and white plastic protective casing. It even had a head, though it in no way resembled a human's, instead a perfect cube, 2 sensors where the eyes would be on a person, and no other discernible features. In its arms, it cradled a rifle. "Watch the robot," the voice instructed. "Don't shoot it just yet, just watch." Sebastian resisted the urge to pull his gun up, to destroy the machine. It was unnerving to look at. He watched cautiously as the robot raised its rifle, turned to its left, and fired directly into a blue platform. A smooth, quiet th sounded, and an uneven red circle splattered on the blue leather. Sebastian let an exasperated breath escape from his lips, having not even realised that he'd been holding it. "These robots are armed with paintball guns," the man explained. "You, however, have a real gun." He let Sebastian process that. "Now, destroy the robot." Sebastian didn't waste a second, pulling the gun up, staring down the sights for no more than half of a second and quickly pulling the trigger. A short burst of 3 bullets shot out of the gun, one striking the robot in its neck, severing a wire, another catching it where its mouth would have been had it had one, and the third shattering one of its sensors. The robot buckled, collapsing to the ground in a heap. "Good," the man continued, satisfied. "Now, here's the game. There will be dozens of these robots breaching the room. Your goal is to destroy each and every one of them without being hit by a single paintball," he explained. "Be cautious that there are multiple levels. You will have to ascend and descend constantly. Always be on your toes. The floor is soft, but don't rely on that to save you if you fall." Sebastian turned back around to face the wider room, glancing up at the elevated levels, trying to deduce if he'd actually be able to climb up there. Some of the platforms were quite far apart from each other, but the height difference between them was manageable. "Are you ready?" Sebastian took a deep breath, relief coursing throughout his body. While he hadn't been expecting anything like this, at least he wasn't in actual danger like he'd initially suspected. He gave a small, stiff nod. The sound of dozens of hydraulic hatches opening filled the room as Sebastian saw walls open to reveal robots being dispatched, and parts of the floor open like trapdoors, robots rising on platforms. Sebastian glanced behind him quickly, immediately dropping behind the cover of the closest wall once he was certain that there weren't any coming out there. Then the barrage of paintballs started. From multiple angles ahead of him, and from above him, paintballs shot through the air, staining the wall which Sebastian hid behind, the floor around him, and the outer wall behind him. Sebastian peeked over the wall, immediately retracting his head once he'd assessed the situation. The robots were also taking cover behind the other platforms, and not all of them were firing at him. It seemed as if they were alternating, swapping in and out to reload, keeping a constant battering of paintballs on his cover. He glanced up towards the higher platforms. He knew that the robots up there weren't in cover. If they were, they couldn't shoot him. That was his best starting point. Sebastian twisted awkwardly, trying to keep every part of his body, and even his gun, behind the blue barrier. One robot was standing quite close to the edge of a platform above him. With a quick pull of his trigger, the robot's legs sparked and the android buckled, tumbling down from one of the highest platforms. Sebastian watched as it landed on top of one of the other robot's cover, blocking it from aiming at him. He raised himself again, quickly taking advantage of his opportunity to shoot with less paintballs coming his way. After hastily catching one of the attacking robots in his sight, he pulled the trigger. As the robot fell, he turned to another, then another, then another. He'd caught them at a good time, as they all seemed to either be reacting to their AI friend falling from above or reloading. After a few spurts and a few robot casualties, Sebastian's gun clicked. He quickly ducked back behind cover, released his magazine, and replaced it with one from his belt. It was strange how natural this all felt. Being attacked by paintballs just made the whole situation feel like a spontaneous airsoft game. Lifting out of cover again, Sebastian took aim, destroyed 2 robots, and narrowly avoided a paintball being shot directly over his head. The Spanish voice returned. "You are doing well, amigo. But would you be doing so well with a teammate?" Before Sebastian could even question the man, another hatch opened, this one just to his right, behind the cover of a green wall. Slowly, crouched on the rising platform, Tara rose, wearing an identical outfit to him, clutching a shotgun. "Sup, dumbass," she greeted, grinning widely. "Sorry for punching you, but, it was for this." Sebastian stared at her for a second, his mouth agape, not knowing what to say. "Try to work together to deal with the threat," the man continued. "You got it, Diego," Tara called, seemingly itching for a fight. She smacked herself in the face and shook her head fiercely. She then leaned to the left of her cover, brought her shotgun up, and sent a robot which Sebastian hadn't even realised had been approaching us soaring backwards, slamming into one of the lower suspended platforms, its head snapping off before it dropped in a heap to the ground. "Get up top, I'll cover you," Tara called to him, as if he was on the other side of the room, before quickly raising herself up, menacingly cocking a shotgun and blasting a robot where its stomach would have been. Sebastian darted out from cover, heading directly to his left, towards a platform which, while not very low, he knew that he could clamber onto. He threw his gun up while running, took a confident leap, and caught himself, his chest slamming uncomfortably into the leather as his arms rested on it like he was leaning on a bar. It was a struggle, especially given that he didn't have anywhere for his feet to hold to boost him up, but he managed it, dragging himself onto the platform, adrenaline pumping. Sebastian grabbed his gun, dropped onto his stomach, and quickly shot a robot which was turning to aim at him, catching it in the chest, and making it stumble backwards, tripping over a piece of cover, and landing on top of another robot. "Nice shot," Tara called to him. Sebastian clambered to his feet, his eyes darting around, searching for the next place to go, eventually catching sight of a platform to his right, above where he'd been taking cover. A quick jump was all which he needed to land safely on the platform, ducking behind a small wall which was stationed on it. He glanced to his left, realising with a jolt that he was vulnerable from either side, but as he laid eyes on the robot taking aim at him, it fell backwards, its plastic casing shattering from the shotgun shell. "I got your flanks," Tara called up to him. "Deal with the ones ahead of us." Sebastian wasted no time in obliging. He raised himself, rested his left arm on the wall, and took aim. He wasn't much higher up than he had been before, but it was high enough that he could shoot some of the robots which were behind cover. A handful of short bursts later, and Tara was sprinting ahead of him, advancing from cover to cover, blasting one of the robots at incredibly close range as it peeked out at her. As soon as she was safe, Sebastian moved too. He hopped on top of the wall, took a second to balance himself, then took a risky leap to a platform ahead and above him, barely catching the edge, hanging with one hand, unwilling to drop his gun, completely vulnerable. "What the fuck are you doing?" Tara shouted, almost shrill. Sebastian cringed at his choice. Paintballs quickly started soaring to either side of him. Not knowing what else to do, Sebastian raised his gun with just his right hand, taking unsteady aim, and started firing almost blindly at any robot which he could see. Most of his bullets missed, but the occasional one made contact, one even landing directly between a robot's sensors. Tara zoomed out of cover. "Come get me, bitches!" she cried, storming through the middle of the battlefield, desperately trying to take the attention away from Sebastian. It worked, the rate of fire against him easing drastically almost immediately. Sebastian grasped the opportunity, swinging his gun onto the platform, and finally grabbing onto the floating ground with his right hand, pulling himself up with as much energy as he could muster. As soon as he was able to, he swung his right leg up, barely hooking it on the edge, using it to hoist himself up. He rolled onto the platform, panting, resting on his back for a moment, before quickly rolling onto his stomach, grabbing his gun, and taking aim at the robots below him. Tara was ducking, sidestepping, leaping out of the way of paintballs. She even dove, twisting in the air as she fired at a robot, the shell missing, but making the android dart backwards, trying to dodge the bullet, giving her barely enough time to scuttle to cover. 2 bursts of bullets, and 2 destroyed robots later, and Sebastian's gun clicked again. He reloaded faster than he'd ever reloaded in his life, lobbing the empty magazine at one of the robots as he completed the process, the magazine, while not doing any damage, smacking the robot's gun to one side as it tried to aim for Tara, disorienting it. Tara hastily pushed her shell into a shotgun and sent the same robot flying before it could pelt her with a paintball. "You're a fucking idiot," she screamed at him. "But the hanging move was cool." Sebastian grinned. "You're the one who ran into gunfire," he retorted, catching another robot in its head as it tried to approach Tara. "Behind you," he then warned. Tara twisted around, rolled out of the way of a paintball zooming towards her, and took the head off of the robot who was responsible before it could duck back behind cover. She then sprinted towards the closest of the suspended platforms, pulling herself onto it effortlessly, before turning to the next one, unwilling to stop moving. It took Sebastian a second to realise that she was coming for him. As soon as she clambered onto the platform beside him, laying flat on her stomach, no cover available for them, she reached towards him, flicked him painfully on the forehead, and scowled. "You're shit at teamwork." "You're welcome for saving you," Sebastian replied flatly. Tara smirked, nudging him playfully in the arm, almost like an annoyed sibling. She then stuffed more shells into a shotgun, cocked it, and leaned over the edge of the platform, taking a few more shots at the robots. Sebastian studied the room as best as he could, with half of his vision obscured by the platform. They dealt with quite a few of the robots already, and it didn't seem as if they were being replaced with new ones. He could count 6 directly ahead of him, and knew that there were likely more out of sight. He took aim at one robot, took its arm off, and scooted backwards, trying to conceal himself without cover, though he overestimated the size of the platform as he threw himself back. Sebastian's knees slipped over the edge, something which jolted his stomach and which made him yelp in shock, quickly clawing at the platform to climb back up, but the fabric was damp from the sweat which he hadn't realised had soaked through his t-shirt. He pushed his gun to safety, trying to use both hands to get a grip. Tara hadn't noticed his dilemma. "Tara!" he gasped, though by the time that she turned to see what was happening, he was already hanging onto the platform, dangling helplessly, without a gun this time. And then he fell. The landing wasn't soft, but it wasn't hard either. He landed in a heap on the somewhat cushioned material which the room was covered in, trying to disperse his energy to avoid injury. Paintballs were zooming through the air all around him. Sebastian glanced to his left, spotting the cover, and instantly trying to crawl towards it, wanting to keep flat against the ground, keep himself a smaller target, though the sting in his right bicep told him that it was over. Within an instant, the whooshing of the paintball stopped, and the robot seemed to switch off, their arms and heads drooping, their legs straightening. "Bad luck, Agent," Diego cooed softly, empathetic. "That was unfortunate, and you were doing so well." Sebastian clambered to his feet, panting, his face red both from the heat and from embarrassment. Tara dropped down from the platform, landing firmly on her feet, showing no sign of discomfort from the move. She held both guns, one in each hand. She looked slightly disappointed. "Aside from one poor choice, which you recovered from, to be fair, that was a good attempt," Diego continued. "Perhaps you simply need more time. We can try again soon. For now, leave the gun anywhere. I'll collect it later." Sebastian nodded to thin air, no clue as to where to look, but certain that he didn't want to look at Tara. She approached steadily, held out the rifle for him to take, and patted him sympathetically on the shoulder with her newly free hand once he had. "Took me a few attempts," she stated, flashing an understanding smile as he rested the rifle on top of the cover which he'd been heading towards. "Don't worry, you'll get it." "To be fair," Sebastian began, avoiding eye contact, "I didn't know this was going to happen in the first place." "Oh yeah, it's always like that," Tara explained, to which Sebastian's stomach dropped slightly. "It's a combat test, but it's also an improv test, for ambushes." Another hatch in the centre of the north wall hissed as air met air, and the door which Sebastian hadn't even realised was there opened, Roxy walking in, a clipboard held firmly in her left hand, and her hair back in its original bun. "Sorry," she began once she was close, sheepish. "I wish I could have told you about this, but it would have been against protocol." Sebastian shrugged, and Roxy gave him a quick hug, his heart rate picking up immediately in response. She pulled away. "I suppose I need to explain," she stated, Sebastian immediately noticing that her tone seemed to be much less professional, or at least that she wasn't as drastically well pronounced as she had been when they'd met. She seemed much more relaxed now. "It was always intended that you would help us with this data breach since you performed exceptionally on the field with Jake without any training. We were going to give you the option, of course, and let you settle in first, but Since you were so eager to help, Lillian asked Tara and I to find a way to get you here. That made Sebastian smile, pushing his failure to the back of his mind. So I can help? Roxy gave a single enthusiastic nod, a small sounding with it. I was trying so hard not to give it away. I'm really not good at keeping secrets, she giggled. I had to let my hair down to hide my earpiece because I realised it was obvious that I was wearing it, and I was scared of you hearing Lillian's voice, she chuckled to herself. Is Lillian the boss? Sebastian asked. Yep, Tara confirmed, smirking. She's a character. Kinda wacky. Best boss I've ever had. Why was all this so secretive? Sebastian posed, to which Roxy shook her head slightly, clearly having been questioning that herself. Lillian has reasons for everything, she stated. My best guess is simply that she wanted everything to be a surprise on your end, to see what you can do under spontaneous pressure, she theorized. I don't know. Or she just wanted to have some fun with you, Tara countered. To be honest, that is entirely possible, Roxy admitted. The three of them fell into silence, Sebastian's mind buzzing. He was going to be an agent. Maybe not permanently, and maybe not a major one, but still. Well, once he could pass the tests, anyway. What now? Sebastian asked after a moment, to which Roxy shrugged. There isn't a set plan, she explained. The usual protocol is to give you time to train some more before we surprise you with this test again, but we desperately need to deal with this data breach. She sounded exasperated suddenly, like she'd completely forgotten about the horrible situation which the agency was in. I believe that Jake managed to stall whoever is responsible, though, or we would have likely heard otherwise from Lillian by now. She sighed deeply, closing her eyes as she did so. She then reopened them, meeting Sebastian's gaze. How about we go to see her? Sebastian nodded. He was going to meet Lillian.